It's been almost 2 decades since we started our journey to educate and help you take action so you may better manage your financial future. Our goal is to help you accomplish your life's purpose. This podcast reveals financial tips, strategies, and insights that will help you to set your financial goals and guide you along the way. This is Managing Your Financial Future, brought to you by the advisors at Lucia Capital Group.
Oh, snappy music here. Welcome to the podcast. This is Managing Your Financial Future. Johnny Dean, your podcast host and your introducer. Did you think I did a good job on that recorded introduction, Professor Plum, or were you even listening to it?
What introduction?
There you go. Yeah, it's award-winning stuff here, isn't it? Happy to be here. Professor Rick Plum, certified financial planner, professional. I never know what to call you, if it's a CFP professional.
Call me whatever you want. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Okay, there you go. Thank you for that joke. What is this, 1927? But thank you very much. We don't rely on you for the jokes or the one-liners. I'll take care of that. We rely on you for the financial wisdom and the financial advice. If you listened to last week's program, there was some good reaction to it. You were on fire last week, Professor Plum. We talked about the various ways to take money from...
Well, your portfolio, the taxability and how to manage your taxability.
Right. But I tell you
what to look for.
It shows just there's so much to it. There are moving parts. For somebody who's retired, anyway, not to rehash it, you can certainly listen to that episode, but there was a lot there. And the importance of having somebody who knows what they're doing, knowing your tax brackets and all this kind of stuff. And the idea is to make your money last as long as you do. Don't want to outlive your savings.
And the idea is also not to pay too much in taxes. That's what we talked about last week.
Well, that's true, yes. But I'm saying the overall idea is, right. Yes.
You don't want to run out of money before you run out of time.
Yes. And for somebody who's age 65, let's say, that time, we generally, 30 years you try to plan for, 30.
I mean, it's based on the individuals. Obviously, some people think, their family history just doesn't bode well for that. So maybe you don't plan for 30. But even when somebody says, look, I'm not gonna, I talk to people in their 70s and 80s and we talk about this amount of money could be invested for growth, or have a 10-15 year time horizon. Ow, Rick, I don't have a 10 or 15 year time horizon.
You don't know that.
What happens if you do?
Was it Mickey Mantle? No. Who was Mickey Mantle. Who was the one that was the ball player that
didn't expect to live very long?
He did not. All his relatives had died at like age 55 or something. The hard drinker, yeah. I believe it was Mantle.
I believe
and
so.
He wound up living past that. And he thought, he had said, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
Oh, I've said that too. I've stolen it from him. I didn't even know who I was stealing that line from. But.
Well, the thing is, if you retire at 65, you plan for 30 years or so, you don't know how long it's going to be. But let's talk for a moment about somebody who has to plan for longer than that. Somebody who might want to retire early. I did bring this up last week, and I'm glad we got to it because there are a couple of things that you need to know if you're the type that wants to retire early. I was speaking with my wife. Now, she retired, at least for now, temporarily. Maybe she'll go back. Maybe she won't. But she retired last year. And she's talking to me about it, Hey, why don't you? It's how much fun. It's going to be fun. Come on, have a few laughs. Come out to L.A. And I said... I had said, I don't know if I'm the retire early type. And I thought, well, wait a minute, this really wouldn't be all that early. When we talk about, it's a few years early, but at age 58, for me, it's not that early, but it is. When we talk about retiring early, people who are in their early 50s, maybe 50, 55, something like that. Have you talked to people who say they just want to retire early?
A lot of times, it's not necessarily somebody in their 40s and 40s that say, I want to retire at 50. It's somebody at 50, 52, 55 that says, I am sick of the grind.
I've had enough.
The stress is killing me. Or I was downsized, and I don't want to go back. Yeah. Don't make me go back. Please don't make me go back.
Right.
Which is sometimes it's not an option.
Sure.
You haven't done enough up to that point. There's no Social Security to rely on yet. You have to wait until at least 62 unless you're disabled. Or you're a widow or widower of somebody who you can get a benefit, but even that's at age 60. So The problem with retiring early is you have a much shorter funding period, obviously, and a much longer payout period. But there's some other issues too. When we're saving money, we save it in the form of the IRAs and tax deferred accounts. Well, if you're retiring at 50, 52, 53, it's tough to get money out of there. Although we have a new ruling from the IRS that helps that out a little bit.
We'll talk about that in just a second. But yes, as we mentioned last week, people do wind up retiring with money in IRAs, 401ks, tax-deferred accounts, where there are specific penalties for removing that money at age, if you're not age 59 and a half.
And then the other issue is a lot of times people are used to having health insurance covered through their employment. They may be paying something from their paycheck every pay period, but it's usually not the entire bill. It's usually subsidized by the company in some way. And so when they, go out on their own and they realize, holy cow, health insurance is expensive when you're paying the whole premium. And so how do we? So they want to have their $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month cash flow to be able to retire, but they also don't want to show that on a tax return because they want to be able to get subsidized health insurance from the ACA.
Well, it is, for people working, it is subsidized because not only is your employer generally paying at least twice what you're paying,
it's tax
but it's
deductible.
Also tax deductible, which means that you get some of that back theoretically.
You don't have to earn quite as much money to make that $200, $300, $400, $500, whatever dollar a month payment.
Correct.
It's a pre-tax expense rather than a post-tax expense. And so you've got these competing issues. The majority of the money is in IRA, 401k, tax-deferred accounts. And you want to keep your income low so that you can keep your expense, one of your bigger expenses at this point, maybe your health insurance.
Well, and as you said, you have a longer funding period.
You have a shorter funding period, a longer payout period.
That's true. Yeah, funding your retirement, paying out to you. You've got a longer...
Yeah, you're not doing 30 years now.
You may be doing 40.
You may be doing 40 years. And
well, let's take each one of those separately, if that's okay.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it. It's just a matter of you have to plan for it correctly. And a lot of this starts when you're younger, actually saving money. You're 25, 30, you think retirement's not for a long time. Well, I'm here to tell you it happens fairly quickly.
It's quicker than you think, man. You're one day you're 24 and a 40-year-old is old to you and you turn around and your
that
kids,
40-year-old, your kids are almost 40.
Your kids are closer to 40 than you are.
A lot closer.
It happens. So
you starting early, even if you don't know what your retirement goal is, saving gives you options. Whether it's saving in your 401k, your IRA, your Roth IRA. Roth IRA is good for younger people, or just building up and having fun saving and investing. Having the option doesn't mean you have to retire early. But having that available to you gives you options so that if you get to a point that where your job is just like, this is death. I just can't imagine going back to that office.
We were not meant to spend our lives in a cubicle. There's more to life than this, right?
I'm assuming that's from some...
That's an Office Space.
Okay.
It's a reference from the movie Office Space. But it's true. I mean, and those were people in their early to mid-30s.
Right.
That were talking like that.
So starting early, obviously. But once you get to the point, you get into your 50s and you're fed up with working, or you're just realizing this really isn't for me and I'd really like to explore more, do other things. Or even, maybe you're in a position where you're doing pretty well and it's not that you don't like your job, but your family, your kids, and unfortunately your grandkids have moved away and you'd like to be with them more. So, but the jobs aren't where the kids are. Maybe for younger people, the jobs are there, but for the older people, so you say, well, I have to take a much lower income job to be able to be near my kids. Can I afford to do that? So it's not always about just retiring carte blanche, 100% retired early. It may be that you either, because you don't want the stress, you go back to a less stressful position, which means less money. You move to a different part of the world where it's less money. Maybe it's less money to live there too. I don't know. But
well, let's cover each of those topics here on this podcast. First of all, the fact that you've got a longer time period that you have to fund for. You have to
have to be more judicious in the way you plan. And this is where buckets really comes in, because you can't be super aggressive. You cannot accept that negative sequence of return risk that, I was speaking with somebody just the other day who's younger than 55 and wants to retire, and they went to a very large discount house, personal financial advisor place that charges fairly low fee, and their solution was, you're 53 years old, you should have a portfolio that's 50% bonds and 50% stocks, and we'll just take a systematic withdrawal.
Okay.
And while that can work, and probably works a majority of the time, it's that minority of the time that could really screw up.
It can devastate you, as we've seen.
You could run out of money. And so you have to be a little bit more judicious in the way you plan your retirement.
So you like to see some kind of bucket strategy that will allow that. How would that work for somebody who wants to retire at 55 instead of 65?
Well, the bucket strategy works the same regardless of how old you are. It's an allocation for creating cash flow.
Of course.
The problem with it is, where are we going to get the money?
Yes.
I mean, so you've done a great job. Maybe you did you had your 401k. You've been maxing it out since you were 21. And you've got this big pool of money in tax deferred accounts, but you're 52, 53. And you want to retire. Well, how do you get your money out of the IRAs, 401ks, or whatever retirement plan you have, without paying penalties?
Well, that was the other part of this that I want you to cover. I had said you need to fund for maybe 40 years if you're retiring at, say, age 50, 55. So you like the buckets aspect of that.
That's the best way to set up a cash flow for any goal,
and potentially take care of a sequence of returns risk.
That
where the day you retire
helps protect you from that. Yes,
or the first couple of years you retire, the markets go down. And
imagine somebody who retired last December and they're looking at their portfolio right now. I mean, the first quarter of this year hasn't been all that kind. They could be thinking maybe they're rethinking their decision to retire.
Yeah.
And now they're thinking, well, maybe the stress of the work isn't as much as the stress of this market.
Sure. So that's why you like buckets.
I like the buckets concept. Yes,
which is good, and we've talked about buckets before. So for as far as funding for an extra 10 years, as opposed, you at
probably,
age 55,
instead of doing a 4+% distribution, you want to stay below 4%. If you can get, because you have to make it last longer, and you want it to grow because. For retirees that retire at 65, they do face some inflation over the first 10 years or so. But once they get into their late 70s and 80s, inflation, yes, it affects the things that they're buying. They're just not buying as many things.
Sure,
that's not the case when you're retiring at 50, because now you've got multiple years of health potential, and your inflation is still going to be there for 15 or 20 years.
Now, there are those who retire at 50 or 55. Law enforcement and some military, they'll have a pension, so that can help. So we're sort of talking about people that may not have a pension.
Typically, law enforcement or safety members, their goal is to retire at 50. So their pensions are designed around them retiring at 50.
Yeah, and that's fine.
They have a better avenue towards early retirement. Well, what we would consider early, they may not consider it early retirement.
So what about
consider it too long? But
so how about somebody who you just brought this up? Cannot access without penalty their money, which happens to be mostly in a 401k or some kind of IRA, tax-deferred account. They're not old enough.
Right. And so in historical terms, we used to use something called 72T for substantially equal payments coming from a retirement plan. And as long as we set it up over a life expectancy and we took out systematic payments, we could avoid the 10% penalty. It was a retirement payment.
Code section 72T of the IRS code allows you. Can you just take less than a minute and explain how this works?
Well, it says if you have a retirement account and you treat it as creating a lifetime retirement income, then we're going to let you treat it as a retirement account with no penalty. So you have to set up a plan of action that says, I am going to take a distribution from this plan based on a systematic withdrawal, or however you want to look at it, for my lifetime. And if that's done right, you can do it. Now, there's a couple ways to do the math, but the problem was we used to do these quite a lot, especially in the 90s, a little bit less after that, because they put some rules in that said you had to use certain interest rates. And when the interest rates went down to basically nothing a couple of years ago, 72Ts fell out of doing a new 72T fell out of favor. Because you just couldn't get any real distribution. You're stuck with like a 2.5% distribution.
So you'd say I have 100,000 or however much is in my, or probably more than that.
You get $1 million, and now you're going to only be able to take, basically $35,000 a year out of it on the 72T because the interest rates was so low. Maybe even $30,000.
On a 72T, the rules say that you have to take them out for the longer period of, I believe it was 5 years.
Longer, 5 years or to age 59 and a half. So if I set it up at 50, I had to continue to make the same payments
to yourself,
to distribution from the plan until at least 59 and a half. Then I could change them. If I started at 56, I had to do it until at least 61. I had to do minimum of 5 years or to age 59 and a half.
And it was still
It's
taxable.
it's still taxable, but
there's
you're
no
avoiding
penalty.
the penalty.
Right.
Now the problem is, it's like the math for it was like a mortgage. If you're looking, because you have a set number to begin with, like a mortgage, you're borrowing X amount of money, and you have an interest rate, and that interest rate determines your payment. Mm-hmm. The higher the interest rate, the higher the payment. Now, with a mortgage, it's a payment that's required to be put in. The math is exactly the same with the 72T. The higher the interest rate, the higher the payment we can take out of the IRA, because it's the same math. So given the dollar amount of IRA that you have, which is, to start with, is a fixed number, the interest rate, which is given to us by the IRS, when the interest rates went to almost zero, it just made such a low payment
that people couldn't necessarily survive on that.
It's not worth doing.
Yeah.
It doesn't really give me enough money to retire on. Yeah. Well, just earlier, in the last couple of months, the IRS came out and said, you know what? We're going to revise our previous our regulations. Now, prior to 2000, the interest rate that we could use was whatever we thought was reasonable.
Whatever you as an individual thought was reasonable.
Whatever the individual doing the 72T thought was reasonable. Now, in the 90s, people were thinking 10, 12, 15% was reasonable, which gave you a very large payment. But back then, they also thought that earning 20% a year was safe. That didn't last that much long. And then when 2000 came around, 2001, 2002, the IRS realized that a lot of these 72Ts were going to blow up because they were taking out 10, 12, 15%.
In other words,
after they'd lost a ton of money in the market.
IRA or whatever they were taking out was drained.
They were never going to be able to make it 2 or 3 more years, let alone a lifetime of payments.
Yeah.
And if you change the payments, you get a retroactive 10% penalty if you have not satisfied the 5-year or 59.5 rule. So there was all these people that were going to run out of money and still owe penalties on the money they've been taking out for the last couple of years. So the IRS came in and said, okay, we are now going to dictate what reasonable is. And so they set it on a specific rate. And it was based on a midterm rate. And as those rates went down to zero, basically people stopped doing it because there was nothing going on. Well, they've revised these rules again. They said, okay, now, yes, you have to set it on a reasonable rate that we're going to give you based on the midterm, or you can use a 5% rate if that's higher. So you can either use the rate that we give you, which was a specific rate, or 5%, whichever works better for you. So now that so instead of using 2%, 1.25%, we can now use 5% in our calculations, which gives us a much bigger payment. And now we can get back into where we can get a 4% distribution, give or take, from that IRA value. Now that's almost a living wage, so to speak.
Well, it certainly could be helpful in your decision to retire. And again, through this code section 72T, it's not penalized.
I mean, look at the difference between a mortgage at 2% or a mortgage payment at 5% on the same value borrowed.
Yeah.
So it now opens up the opportunity for people to pretend. And we've had such growth in the last several years. Okay, notwithstanding this year, but such incredible growth in the markets, in our portfolios, in our 401ks. I talk to people and they look at their 401k and they're like, "You've been funding it, you haven't been paying attention to it," which is probably a good thing.
Probably a very good thing, certainly this year.
This year, agita. Yeah. But so now it's a matter of, how do we get enough money out? Can you do the calculation and know that you're going to get X amount of dollars? Now, you can't change it. So can you live on that? Now, if you can't live on that, then the idea is, well, do you have any other assets outside of your IRA 401k world, personal money that you can use to supplement it, Roth money that you can use to supplement it? Now, Roth is a little bit tricky in that you're not at a qualified distribution. So the only thing that's available to you in the Roth at this point are the contributions that you've made. So the earnings but you only have to use the contributions to get to 59 and a half.
Yeah. Well, depending on how old you are and how much contributions you've made.
And when your first Roth IRA was.
Yeah.
But once you get to 59 and a half, most of the time we can open the Roth up a little bit more. The earnings are available. Yeah. But it's just a matter of where's the money? How much do you need? Is it a viable? Can you set up so the first thing we do is we look at the amount you have and determine whether or not it will support your retirement goal. Obviously, we'll be able to reduce the distribution, just the sheer distribution at some point in the future when Social Security kicks in, whether that's 62 or later. That's another decision to be made. Can it support your goal? And then can we get that much goal or that much income out without a penalty? Because if you're dealing with that saying, look, I need to take more out now and I can reduce it later once Social Security kicks in. Well, if all your money's in the 401k, it may not, or IRA, it may not let you take that much money out with the 72T. So how do we go about making it work for you?
And you don't want to pay the penalty.
Well, again, why we're not happy paying the taxes we pay. Why pay more? Yeah.
It's true. It's a 10%. It's 10% of
it's 10% of what you take out.
10% penalty tax on top of the taxes you're already going to be paying.
Right.
Whatever taxes those are.
Federal and state if you're in a state with a state income tax. And what is your budget going to be? Because now we have to look at, we've been spending, $5,000 a month. Okay. That's what's coming out of your checking account every month. But now you're going to have to increase that by how much you're going to pay for health insurance.
That was the third leg of this, which is health insurance. Professor, it's still not, for whatever reason, for those who are not retired, widely known what age you can start taking Medicare.
65.
65 is the youngest.
Working or not, if you are working, you can postpone it if you're covered by group health insurance through your employer, not individual health insurance through your employer. But if you retire before 65, you're still not eligible under current law until 65 to get Medicare.
Hopefully they'll change that, but at least they're talking about it. But
they've talked about it for a while.
It hasn't happened yet. We'll see. I think it will one day, but of course, probably too late for you and me.
I'll be there by the time.
We'll be there at that time. Then, hey, we're lowering it to 45. Everybody. Yeah.
They seem to do that with the things that once I get to the age, then they change it to an earlier age. But
hey, that's just the breaks.
Yeah.
Them's the breaks, as they say.
So
health insurance. So
when you're looking to retire early, you have to really look at your expenses, what's happening, and then add in. So the first thing is you subtract out the expenses that won't be there anymore. Maybe you have specific clothing needs when you work. Maybe you do a lot of commuting for work and things. So those expenses may not be there. But then you have to look at expenses that are going to be there that weren't there before. One of them primarily is the health insurance cost. It would be probably dangerous for me to retire early because while I'm at work, I don't spend money. When I'm at home, it's a dangerous game. I have expensive hobbies.
Well, you do have expensive hobbies. I mean, you're not doing you're not doing needlepoint as a hobby.
No, it usually involves something with horsepower for me, but that's
yeah. Well, and then the resultant medical bills, which is why you need to have health insurance.
That was one time,
one or two maybe. I know one time that I know of falling off a bike. But okay, so how do we do this? I mean, there's no way around. You can't just jump on Medicare yet.
No,
at age 52 or 53.
And so the stars do have to align in some respect. I mean, I was speaking with somebody today who wants to retire before 55. They need $6,000-$7,000 a month. Their portfolio can support it. They have done a very good job up to this point.
That's nice.
And they've got a decent size amount of money in their personal account. And that's important. Why is that important? Because they want to keep their gross income down below $40,000.
Why 40,000, Professor Plum?
To get the highest potential subsidy on the Affordable Care Act insurance.
Is this a single individual?
Single individual.
Okay, yeah.
And so they want to keep. So we've got competing issues here. Sure, we've got $1 million+ in IRAs, but we can't really use it because that's all taxable. And they don't want their income to go up. They've got another $500,000, $2 million, or another $1 million in personal money. And the problem with personal money is, depending on how you invest it, it's hard to know what the taxability of that's going to be until the end of the year. You know that if you've got money in the bank, you know what it's earning. But if you've got money in mutual funds and other things, you could be surprised by capital gain distributions.
As we talked about last week.
And so you have to develop a plan to try to make sure that you keep your income low. And so the way we did it, we're going to be probably living off of personal money And towards the end of each year, if there are not large capital gains. Now, the other thing is they don't want to have almost no income because then they have to be on Medicaid. They don't get ACA, they get Medicaid.
There's a low...
There's a bottom threshold for the Affordable Care Act plans.
Yes.
Below that threshold, you go on Medicaid.
What do people do before ACA? It seems like it's been in place, which I guess it has.
You paid for medical insurance.
You just
or
bought
you didn't have insurance.
I mean, the only thing that I can remember, if there was no work involved, you had some kind of COBRA, but even
COBRA's a short period. That's only for extending employer-provided
So you
work.
have to find some kind of private...
There's always been private personal insurance.
But we know how much that costs.
Yeah, it's gotten more expensive lately.
It's always gotten more expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, even back then, it was like...
It was bad, but it wasn't like today.
It wasn't. I looked into it way back, and I think in 2008, 2007 is when I did. And I said, I did it for a little while, but not that long. But anyway, so you're saying to use...
So basically, they want to tailor their income. So the idea is, in the years where there's not large capital gain distributions, not other things, and their income may be too low, do a Roth conversion at the end of the year, bring the income up to the limit they want it. In the years where there are large capital gains, don't do the Roth conversion so your income is where you want it to be. It's all a matter of monitoring, tailoring, and fixing it to meet your needs. But this person's going to be able to retire and not deal with the stress that they don't want to deal with anymore. And if they get bored in a year or two, maybe they get something else, but it won't be as stressful. They don't have to be making the big bucks anymore. If they want to go back to work, it's not because of the money. It's because they enjoy the social interaction of a specific type of employment. And they don't have to have the really stressful job. They could be, pick your fantasy job. I mean, I don't know what it would be. Some people it's, working at the library, they don't have to make the big bucks. Who knows? Or you could just volunteer and do things. As long as you've got your plan in place, you've found a way to, you know what your expenses are, including the ones that are come about now that retirement is here. You know what your asset base is. Have you developed a plan of action to be able to make it work? Have you covered your insurance needs? Have you covered your tax needs? Are all those in place? Okay, sure. Now you can go out and have fun.
Well, and as you're speaking about this, it occurred to me too that even if you can't squeeze all that you need to squeeze out of it between health insurance and between this and that, you don't have enough to get what you need. You could certainly perhaps work part-time in a far less stressful job. Maybe.
Although that's not always the easiest thing. I know of somebody who at age 58 was downsized, and they're very well qualified. They're very well respected in their industry, and they were getting job offers for what they were doing before. But what they were doing before was working 60 hours a week, stressed out of their mind. They didn't want to do that anymore. They said no. So they started applying for jobs that paid half as much because they were in a position where they could do that. They wanted to work.
Full-time type job?
A full-time job where they could go 40 hours a week and leave without bringing work home.
Sure, yeah.
And not have the high stress. But employers looked at them and said, you're too qualified. You're going to get bored and you'll leave us. We're not going to hire you. And no. This is what I want. I don't want that other job. We'll hire you for that high-paying, high-stress job. We're not going to hire you for the lower-paying job because you're too qualified. They never found another job.
Is that this is actually what you've seen?
That is, yes, I know that person very well. They never found another job. They're 63-ish now. They're still kind of looking, but it's been 5 years.
How'd they get by?
They had a reasonable amount of money. They cut back.
In some cases,
they don't take vacations like they used to.
Yeah. Not much of a retirement if you have to.
But there's not much of a choice either.
Well, no, and that's the other thing I think maybe you need to think about too if you're going to retire at 52, 53, 54.
You can't just expect to be able to do part-time is what I was getting to on this.
Oh, okay. No, that's great point. Great point. That's true. Because they may not, they'll say, who are you? I'll hire a 25-year-old. Of course, a 25-year-old could also leave for a better position.
And for whatever reason, they tend to leave more often than the boomers.
That's true. That is true. But if you're going to try to retire at 54, 55, and you want to go out and do everything that a 66, 67-year-old can do, you may not be able to do that because of the sheer amount of, you don't want to overspend. at that rate. You don't have Social Security yet. You don't have really much guaranteed income. Maybe it's not going to be all that great a retirement.
Well, that's part of the decision-making process when you do the plan. The person I was speaking with earlier, they're going to be able, they know their budget. They know what they've been retired for a couple months now. So they know what's going on. They know how much they need to spend. And as long as their health insurance doesn't get too carried away, kind of bloated the income that they suggested they wanted. They said, well, I think I can probably get by on X, but we're going to make it X plus.
And see how that works.
Just knowing that I've got a little bit of wiggle room in there.
Yeah.
So they don't grow their portfolio to the moon, but they don't have any legacy heirs that they want to leave it to anyway.
So they don't really, even if they did, maybe they didn't care.
But even if they did, it's at least, we were looking at different assumptions and different time periods.
Yeah.
And it may not be keeping up with today's inflation rate as a pure, your $1 million isn't growing by 5% overall every year after all distributions, but it's still more than what you started with based on the assumptions.
So to kind of sum up what you've been saying, if you want to retire in your early 50s,
start planning early if you can.
You need to have, well, yes. First of all, you need to have enough already there in either personal money or IRA money in order to
having both
start
is really
doing
nice.
Start doing a bucket type strategy. I mean, can you bucketize? You could, I guess. Well, somebody who's got almost all tax deferred money.
You could try. Now, like I said, though, like if you're 57, 58 years old and you need, $6,000 a month, you've got $1 million IRA, but that in a couple of years, 5 years or so, you're going to be able to reduce that down, by, $3,000. So you're only going to need $3,000 a month at that point, because once your Social Security kicks in, you and your spouse, you can reduce the distribution dramatically. It still may not work for you, though, because taking $72,000 a year out of $1 million IRA is probably over what the 72T allows. Mm-hmm. And so how do you need some personal money there to supplement, because we're taking a pure bucket standpoint, but it won't work from a penalty standpoint. And so you've got a couple of different levels that you have to play with. Where when we're 59 and over, it doesn't really matter. We're just dealing with the costs and not the penalties.
Yeah, taxes.
But under 59 and a half, we have to worry about those dadgum penalties. Now, one of the things, if you're 55 plus, that we've seen people do and is available, is we know that the IRA distribution, if you take it out before 59 and a half, and we're not doing a 72T, you have a 10% penalty. But if I am working for an employer where I have a 401k, and I've got a decent size amount of money in my 401k, and I'm 55, or I will be 55 in the year that I terminate employment, and it's termination by either I quit, they can me, whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter why I terminate.
You're just not working for them anymore.
The rule for the 10% penalty is waived when I take distributions from that employer's retirement plan. Mm-hmm. So if you're 55 this year and you want to retire this year, maybe you can use your 401k and there is no penalty regardless of how much you take out. So maybe you need $50,000 a year, you got $500,000 in there, and you're going to take it out over the next 5 years, or you have $250,000 in the 401k. You have a bunch of money in IRAs, but this one 401k has, $250,000, and you're 55 and you need $50,000 a year. Well, that's a pretty good sized distribution, but it won't be penalized. But it also buys you the time to get to 59 and a half, so then you can access your other IRAs.
Yes.
So you've got these puzzle pieces that when you work them correctly, you may be able to take a much higher distribution from that account than would otherwise be available, or otherwise be penalized from other accounts. Now, taking money from a 401k sometimes works very easily. Sometimes it's all just on the computer. You just tell them what to do. You can set up a systematic. You can change it. You can take periodics in addition. Other times, 401ks, once you're a retiree or no longer an active employee, mm-hmm. You're kind of persona non grata. They'll tell you can either take it all out or you can leave it all. But we're not going to.
In other words, they won't let you take $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month.
So if you're planning on using your 401k and using that 55 and older distribution until you can get to 60 type to get the IRAs. Make sure your 401k will play ball. I have somebody who retired recently, and they will let them set up a systematic distribution from their 401k one time. But you better get the number right the first time, because you can never change it.
For the rest of your life?
For the rest of the time of that 401k.
For the life of that 401k.
Now, you can always, you can take periodic distributions in addition. So that sounds reasonable, right? But to do a periodic distribution, you need to have a notarized form done every time. So it just makes it difficult. It's not that it's out of control, but it just isn't the easiest thing in the world.
Some companies, I could see that. Some companies, maybe smaller ones, it costs.
This was a big company.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
And the other thing is, I mean, other companies also, if you're trying to do a buckets plan where you want to take, you've got your money in your 401k, and you've got the 250 in a safe account that you're going to draw 50,000 a year out of, but you got the rest of the money in other accounts, but they won't let you take it only from that one account. They will make you take whatever distribution comes out pro rata from every one of the funds. So you would be reverse dollar cost averaging unless you had 100% of the money in that safer account.
So the takeaway is know what your plan
know what your 401k
allows
does allow.
with withdrawals allow you to do.
Some work seamless, they're easy, they're wonderful. Some are not so easy to work with.
Is it possible, I'll ask you this because we know the answer, but if your 401k does give you a problem and it's not going to work for you, that distribution, to roll that elsewhere?
Well, you can roll it to an IRA, but now you have to deal with 72T.
Yeah. So just so that people know that.
Yes.
Doing things like rollovers, you have to
they can't
really
stop you from rolling the entire money over. So they may say you've got all these restrictions if you want to keep the money here, but you're welcome to terminate and roll the whole thing over. Yeah, and roll it to an IRA.
But you need to understand that there are consequences, sometimes tax consequences for doing so.
Well, there's tax and in some rare instances, there are health insurance issues. If you are a retiree, that maybe you're getting a pension. This is where some people want to take the pension instead of the lump sum, even though the pension may not give them. They may get health insurance as a retiree until they get to Medicare. So they're all little considerations. So these are all pieces of the puzzle that are just fun to put together.
Once again, this is why you talk to an advisor, okay? It really is helpful. Someone like Professor Plum or any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors who have seen this stuff before, and they know the little pitfalls. You just mentioned 2 or 3 that somebody may not have ever thought of, and things to consider if you're retiring early. I would suggest you give the advisors a call if you haven't done so. Have them at least go over what you have. 800-644-1150. That's the number at Lucia Capital Group. Long time sponsor of this program. 800-644-1150. You can talk to any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors. They all work with Professor Plum. All the plans go through Professor Plum, as I've been telling you all this time. And have them just tell you, here's what can happen. Know what you're up against, and you can make the decision yourself. Is it worth it for you to retire early? Have you had enough of your job? Have you had enough of the stress, and you didn't think you could retire? Hey, Professor, as you said, you talked to somebody today. As it turns out, they do.
They are going to.
It has to be done this way. A certain way?
It's got to be a certain way because they want to make sure they get the ACA coverage.
But there are ways to do this. Again,
and it works.
800-644-1150 or go online, LuciaCap, LuciaCap.com. You can find all of our articles and helpful videos and all this stuff, and talk to an advisor that way at LuciaCap.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, Spotify. That's where you're going to find us. You can get our podcast downloaded directly to you, listen to them at your leisure or possibly leisure, and learn this stuff. This is fun. These are fun topics. We'll have another one coming up next week. I haven't quite decided what it is yet, Professor Plum, but we'll huddle up, and next time we get together, we're going to have some more of this wonderful, wonderful stuff. I appreciate this, Professor. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We will talk to you again next week. We thank everybody for listening. For Professor Rick Plum, Certified Financial Planner, Professional, I'm your podcast host, not the advisor, but podcast host Johnny Dean. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. To the extent that this material concerns tax matters, it is not intended or written to be used and cannot be used by a taxpayer for the purpose of avoiding penalties that may be imposed by law. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. Different types of investments and/or investment strategies involve varying levels of risk, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or investment strategy will be profitable for a client's or prospective client's portfolio. Thus, investments may result in a loss of principal. Accordingly, no client or prospective client should assume that the information presented serves as a receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from LCG or from any other investment professional. You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material was gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. Traditional IRA account owners have considerations to make before performing a Roth IRA conversion. These primarily include income tax consequences on the converted amount in the year of conversion, withdrawal limitations from a Roth IRA, and income limitations for future contributions to a Roth IRA. In addition, if you are required to take a required minimum distribution or RMD in the year you convert, you must do so before converting to a Roth IRA. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Roth IRA distributions of principal from a Roth IRA are tax-free. However, any earnings will be taxed at ordinary income rates, and a 10% penalty tax will apply if withdrawn prior to age 59.5 or within 5 years of the date the Roth IRA was established, whichever is longer. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There is no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. Before investing, carefully consider a mutual fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. To obtain a prospectus or summary prospectus, which contains this and other information, call your financial advisor. Read the prospectus carefully before investing. Rick Plum is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Lucia Capital Group, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC.